Welcome to Breaking Par with Bernard Sheridan, the golf podcast that interviews the best and brightest minds in the golf industry. Now, here's your host, Bernard Sheridan.
So, Rick, welcome to Breaking Par. Thanks so much for being with us today and taking
pleasure.
the time out of your schedule.
My pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about first, when is the very first time you picked up a golf club in your life?
In my life, I really picked it up when I was in college. My background, I grew up playing baseball. I played baseball into college. Was and still is my sport. Golf did not really enter my life in a big way until I was about 40, my late 30s. So I'm a late bloomer, I guess.
It's funny. It's very similar with me too. I was a big baseball guy, and I played a lot of baseball as a youth and a lot of hockey, and fooled around with golf. Didn't get involved with it really until I was about 33 years old, and then fell in love with it and just chased after it like crazily until I was about 39, and then became a teaching professional when I was 39, and I'm 59 now. So it's been a big part of my life for a good amount of my life, but didn't start it real young either.
Yeah.
So when did you decide, at what age, to pursue it as a career in some aspects here? Because I know that you instruct it, and you've created some pretty incredible training devices along with it to help with that instruction. So when did that start to come into your life?
Well, when I first started my career as a business person, I was a CPA. I worked for a Big 8 firm, and I got into business consulting, and so I've consulted over the years businesses in various industries, and I was someone had put me in touch with a guy that was making putters small time, and I'm here in Texas, and he was making making putters on a mill, and he wanted to make a business out of it. And so a friend put us together, and that was the beginning of my career as in the golf industry, was building a putter company. And we started from very little, back then in those days, this was about 1993. There weren't very many. Milling putters was kind of new. There was only a handful of people doing it, and so we were making putters. We were making, at the time, we were making putters for the Ben Hogan Company. It was a small line of putters. I think it only ended up being about 2,000 putters over the stretch, but that really got us into the industry, I think, with our name. My partner's name was Kirk Hurry, and after that we hooked up with Bridgestone Sports and made putters with them for a couple of years. We co-designed a putter with Raymond Floyd, and built a relationship with him, got to know him very well, and the putter itself did very well, and that deal ended up going, like I said, about 2 years. And then we found ourselves looking for the next contract. It was always, what's the next putter line? So we ended up doing something that broke the mold. One of the unique things about the way we made these putters is we made, it had a screw-in hosel, a stainless steel hosel. And this hosel, it started out straight, and then we had a machine that would bend it. We'd bend it by hand with a bending tool, and we'd bend everything standard. And that's the reason it was created that way is to cut down on the material it took to mill a putter. So most at the time, most putters were being milled. You'd have to mill the hosel and the head all as one, or some people would they'd weld it on. We didn't really want to do the welding part, so it was either mill it out of one piece, or come up with a way to mill the head itself out of a much smaller piece of material, and then put this hosel in. So that's how we made our putter. It had a patent on it and everything, and it turned out that became the magic in what we did, is because the way it developed was we had a couple of tour pros come in. One guy came in and he wanted a putter specifically made for him. So we bent it, we did it all kind of standard and put it in his hands. We had the length and the lie and the loft all set, because we could bend all those things. And it didn't quite look right to him, so Kirk said, well, go out and get your favorite putter. So he went out and pulled the putter out of the trunk, brought it back in, set it down, and sure enough, the shaft was bent forward, so his hands were forward pressed. So we put our putter in the machine, we bent it forward pressed, put it in his hands. He goes, that's perfect. That's it. I love this putter. We're like, huh. Another pro comes in, went through the same kind of thing. Go ahead and get your putter. He brought it in, and his putter was bent back. His hands were back. That's where he liked his hands. So we matched it, and he was like, this is perfect. I mean, it was just a matter of a few little bends, and we could make a putter look that may have looked ugly to somebody look beautiful. So I got this idea is, God, we need to develop our system so pros can do this. So that was where the first putter fitting system was born, and we ended up putting them out in Houston area. We put them out in the Dallas area, and this was in '96 that we did this, late '96. And within a few months, Titleist was calling, and all the big companies were calling, and we ended up. Titleist didn't want to do it, and I think it's because the person they had in there, Mr. Cameron, wasn't really fond of it. Maybe it intimidated them a little bit. I don't know. He wasn't really fond of fitting at the time. So we ended up going with Slazenger Golf, and they ended up putting out about 1,200 of these fitting systems, most in the U.S., but they put a bunch out in the U.K. and in Australia, and that's what got me into the putter fitting business, and then it ultimately got me into the instruction business. And I've got tons of stories along the way, but and that's when the laser was first born. Can I go on and tell you the story of the laser?
Would love to hear the story of the laser. First, tell us a little bit about the laser itself and like what it is now, and then let us know where it began.
What if I started from where it began?
Where it began to where it is now? That's fine too.
I think it's a better progression if I tell where it began. So the first year we had our fitting system out, we had put out in that first year close to 500 systems. That was a big deal. I mean, think about it. That was a big deal. As a matter of fact, when we signed our deal with Slazenger to do this, we signed it in December, and then we went to the '97 PGA show, and actually the deal was dependent on us selling 30 systems at the show. If Slazenger, they decided if they couldn't sell 30 systems at the show, they didn't want to do it. No one had ever done anything like this before, by the way. So, I mean, the system, when you got it, it was on a cart. It had a bending machine on top. It came with 24 putters. It was an investment of $3,000 to the golf pro. So it was a significant purchase for him. And so no one had ever done it. Slazenger did not know what to expect. So we decided, I was pretty confident. So, all right, if we can't sell 30 systems at the show, then we won't do the deal. We went to the show in '97, and if you count the sales that were generated 3 weeks after the show, that were the show was the source, we had sold 300 systems.
Wow. 10 times the amount that they wanted.
10 times the minimum that they were worried about. And it was easy. It was just and we knew because we had sold enough of them that we knew. As a matter of fact, the way we used to sell them is I had my pickup truck, I'd roll this system into the back, I'd take it out to we were going to the nicest golf courses in Houston. I'd take it out, I'd do a demonstration, I'd fit the pro to a putter, and he'd go, "When can I get it?" I said, "Well, you take this one, leave it." That's how I sold them, one at a time. And I only had, out of all the appointments I only had one guy not take it. So I thought that was pretty neat. So that's why I was confident that we would do well at the show.
It's too bad that your batting average wasn't like that when you were a kid, or you wouldn't have been.
I wouldn't have been in golf.
But then again, we wouldn't have had you in golf and had some of these great products that you've produced.
Yeah. So you're making me dream again. So, anyways, after that first year, I remember the phone call. It was like in December of '97. We're nearing our first year with Schlesinger, and Dick Lyons, at the time, he's now with Mizuno. He was in charge of Mizuno Sports now, but back then he was in charge of the club division for Schlesinger Golf. And they were big. They were into fitting full clubs. That's what they did. So that's why they liked our system. It complemented their big system. So I get a call from him in December of '97, about 45 days before the next show, and he goes, "Rick, there's a golf pro in Florida that he's building putters, and he says that he can control a person's aim by how he builds the putter." And I was like, "I don't believe it. I've got to see it." Well, the pro's name was Mike Shannon, and he was the head pro at Islesworth at the time. Now, Mike Shannon's probably one of the top putting gurus in the industry right now, and has been for years. So I had to see this. He had gotten our system and had played with it for that first year, and had determined all this. So when we go to the show in '98, we go a few days early, and we go visit Mike out at Islesworth, and he does a couple of demonstrations of how he builds the putter, and how he can take someone who aims left and make them aim back to the right, or if they aim right, how he can influence them to aim back to the left by how he constructed the putter. Very, very, very interesting. He's an amazing guy in how he figured this out. But what he was using was, he would take this little arrow-shaped plastic plate, and he would square it up against the putter face, and then you'd have to step back. The golfer would have to step back, and he would show you, all right, so see where this plastic plate is pointing. That's where you're aiming. And 9 out of 10 people were aiming well left or well right of their target. So yeah. This was kind of an eye opener to a lot of folks. And so it hit me, man, if we could put a laser on top of that thing, then we could really demonstrate it where someone aims. And so that's where the laser was born. So what we developed, my partner Kirk Curry, he developed it. You just it was an arrow-shaped plate that we mounted the laser on. We would calibrate the laser to the plate. The plate would have the back plate would have a flat area, so you could square it up against the putter face. And then when you shoot the laser, it would show exactly where the putter was aimed. And it became, our whole fitting system we had decided was built on. From that point forward, became we're gonna fit a putter. First, our premise is aim becomes very, very important, and then line angle, length, loft, shaft size, all those. Grip size, all of those things now become secondary, just as important. But we first fit for aim, and no one had ever done this before. This was all new. There's plenty of people doing that. Adele, I think, several years later came out with a system that fits for aim. But we were the first. It was amazing stuff. So That's where the laser was born. Now back then, laser technology, there were only red lasers, and they weren't real strong lasers. So in order to, and most fitting we did outside. So in order to see it, we had to build a white backboard that whenever the red laser hit the white, it would reflect off of it, and you could see it. So that was the first laser ever that I think for AIM that was ever made. We got it patented, and the patent is so long ago. The patent has since expired on it. So that's the first laser.
And that was just a dot, correct? So
It was just a red dot. That's all lasers could do back then. It was just a red dot.
and now it's evolved tremendously since that point.
So since that point, and you want to hear my best story on the laser?
Sure.
So back in 1998, this was our second year. What Slazenger had done was, we didn't have the internet back then. We didn't have all this social media different ways that you could sell things and demonstrate things and train people. So you had to go out and train folks. And so what Slazenger did was they had six technical reps. They called them technical reps. They would go out and sell the system, and then they would train the staff. Now, one of the weaknesses of the whole system was that they'd go out and train the staff, and what happens the next year? The staff turns over,
Yeah.
and now you're stuck with the head pro who really wasn't executing it. He was having his assistants execute it, or the director of golf who brought the system in. He doesn't know how to use the system. All the people that are trained were gone. So that really became a downside of how the system worked. But in that first year, after we had gotten the laser, the technical rep down in Florida, his name was Rick Gomes. He had gone to school with Gary Nicholas. He played college golf, and they played on the same team. And he'd gotten to know Gary, and so he fit Gary to a putter, which Gary eventually, at the time he was on the tour, so he ended up putting it in his bag and used it on tour. But when he got fit, he said, "Rick, this system is unbelievable." Because we had a process we go through that, not only do you fit for aim, but then you start fitting for length and lie and loft, and the putter was made on the spot. You put the putter in the machine, you bend it, you cut it down to the length, you grip it, and in 5 minutes the person's putting with a custom-made putter right there. It's amazing. And so he said, Gary said, "You've got to show my dad." So Rick's like, "Anytime." a couple weeks later, he gets a phone call, and it's Jack Nicklaus. He said, "Rick, I'd like you to come over on Sunday and show me what you showed Gary." So he takes a system over there in his backyard. He said one of the finest practice greens you've ever seen right there in Jack Nicklaus' backyard. And he goes and spends the next 2 to 3 hours with him, takes him through the process, lasers him. And Jack Nicklaus was aimed 2 degrees left of the start line. So he was from 10 feet. We always did it from about 10 feet. He was aimed 2 inches left of the cup. And he stopped. Rick said he stopped for a moment. He thought, and he goes, "Now I know why my putting stroke has worked for all these years." But see, Jack, he kind of shoved things to the right. From his static aim, his stroke would go inside and down the line, kind of. He called it kind of a piston stroke, but it would go more straight. So what he didn't realize is that he was actually shoving it right of where he initially aimed his putter. But it worked for him,
And then he would hold it off through impact to keep it on line.
Exactly. So it was 2 degrees. It was 2 degrees right of his static aim was where his line was, and and he'd always known what his stroke looked like, but this revealed, he was like, now I know why it's worked for all these years.
Sure.
The sweet thing about that whole experience was he ended up putting the putter in his bag. He was still playing on tour at the time, and he proceeds to putt with it for the next 4 or 5 years. No one knew it. We couldn't advertise it because he had his own equipment company.
Right.
So he could not endorse anything. So for 5 years, Jack Nicklaus used our putter, and no one knew. I personally made him a couple of years later. We came up with some variable weighting in our head, and Jack's putter was 33.5 inches long. So whenever you start shortening a putter, the putter head feels a little lighter.
Yep.
And one of the reasons we came up with the variable weighting is because, we knew we had to come up with something to compensate for if someone's custom putter was long, or if it was short, you had to adjust the weight for that. And so I knew that he would, because he had the shorter putter, I knew he would love this idea of being able to weight it up to compensate for that length. And I made him one personally, and that one went in his bag, and he putted with that for another 2 or 3 years. So I got to meet him, and it was very, very good experience. So that's really, the laser played a big role for years. Now, how the laser evolved, we're gonna fast forward about 15 years, and I decided, because I got myself into instruction, and I'll tell you quickly how I got into instruction. I was out. I'd go out and fit putters. I'd probably fit thousands of putters. We'd go out and do member guests. We'd go out and do, all sorts of events, and we're fitting a couple hundred people over a weekend. So I just got really, really, really good at it. And one of my very first accounts in Houston, we'd fit a member guest room years ago, and I had asked him, could I come out and do a fitting day at his club? And he was a little hesitant. He said, Rick, he said, let me tell you, I've been fitting your putters for years, and I think it's a great system. But the thing that kind of struck me is I'd fit my members, and 6 months later they'd come back and say, Ken, I'm not putting any better. And that kind of struck me. We've been fitting all these putters for all these years. The premise was if someone was aiming bad, and we made them a putter that improved their aim, that their stroke would evolve.
Right.
That's the first time I'd ever really heard a user say, I've never really seen the that it's maybe some people might improve, but I've never really seen that it improves putting. And that's when it really hit me that instruction, putter fitting, getting someone fit to a putter is just a small part of improving someone's ability to putt better. It really takes more. It's more about instruction and then fitting through instruction. And so that's what got me into learning. I started learning more and more about putting. I've seen every stroke imaginable as fitting thousands of putters, but using my buddy Mike Shannon and learning from him, and then just conducting more and more instruction sessions over the years. It made me, I think, as knowledgeable as anybody about how you teach someone to putt and how you fit a putter to them, things like that. So that's what got me to instruction and got me into the instruction side of the business in a big way. And like I said, I think I learned the hard way just by doing. So I think it was probably 5 years ago that I said, I want to expand this laser. I want to, with all this new technology, green lasers, I want to see if I can expand it. And I came across Mark Sweeney, who has started the Aim Point. And he was looking for something. And he approached me about a laser. And so I sent him this high-power green laser. And this is what I've been needing. Because, here he is teaching Aim Point, teaching people that they needed to aim at a certain spot. But we know that most people can't aim their putter where you have them direct. So it became really important for him that not only do I have to tell people where to aim, but maybe we need to show them how to aim theirs. So he wanted something that he could see outdoors. So that's where we came up with the high-powered green laser. And then the next thing I did was this. Right.
Okay, so from there we lost connection there just for our listeners. So, but we're back. So you decided you were going to modify it since laser technology was getting a little bit more involved, and Mike Sweeney wanted to see something that was outside. You came out with this green laser, and now you said you started to modify it from there. So go from there.
Yeah. So what I did was for Mark, I modified it. I removed the front leg because it sat on the base plates that the laser was mounted to. It had 3 legs. It had 2 back legs and the front leg. I removed the front leg, and by doing that, what you could do is you could square it up against the putter, and when you turn the laser on, just simply by tilting it up and down, that dot would trace the aim line. It's really cool. So instead of having to use a backboard and just shooting a straight line, a line parallel to the ground so it hits the target, I could now shoot a line and trace it up and down to show on the surface where the aim line was. So now we could do breaking putts. If someone's putting on a putt that's aiming on a putt that's left or right breaker, I can show them where their start line is. And it was that was kind of a big deal. And so Mark, he loved that. So that kind of got me to the next step about what a laser how it can help us. It was still an instructor item. It was still something that an instructor uses because you really just couldn't self-monitor aim. I mean, it's very difficult to determine yourself where you're aiming your putter.
Sure.
And I always thought it was very important to make sure that you didn't have anything attached to a putter. You start attaching things to a putter, it can start that just whatever is attached to it might affect how you aim it.
Sure.
And I always wanted to get a true read on where someone aimed a putter. When we play golf, when we aim our putter, we aim it with the ball in front of the face. The ball can sometimes influence where we aim our putter because you got a flat surface, which is your putter, and then you got a round ball in front of it. That can affect how some folks aim their putter. So the whole idea is that I want someone to aim their putter with the ball in front of the face. We move the ball, and we square our tool up against the face and get a true reading of where they're aimed versus where they think they're aimed. And so so it's always been an instructor item. Now I'm limited. There are only so many instructors out there, and a heck of a lot more golfers. So I wanted to come up with something that maybe the golfer could use. So that's when I came up with the solid line. I got this idea of this laser being able to now project, and I think being able to take a point and trace it kind of gave me the idea of, well, what if it was just a solid line? So that's when I got into expanding the laser into a solid line, and that gives me the ability now to be able to lay a line so someone can putt with it. So now maybe it's a consumer item more so than an instructor item. And then once I created that, I was like, I saw we lost connection again.
Yeah. Go ahead again.
So we had problems with when I'd set my little base plate on the ground. Sometimes the greens, if they were a little rough, it would affect the line. And someone suggested, well, you should mount this on a tripod. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, I'm getting an incoming phone call here. So I mounted on a tripod. That gave us the ability to then be able to work different angles and project this line more effectively. So, like I said, it became a consumer item. The next idea then I got was it's got to be able to, it's got to be user friendly. So that's when we developed the remote control. So now I can turn that laser on and off via a wireless remote. So now someone can really train, because the question becomes then is, all right, so if you're going to set up to your start line, we don't get to set up to a visual line out on the golf course. So let's set up, click the line on. Let's really see, where are you? Where do you think you are versus where are you?
Right. What's feel and what's real? Yeah.
What's feel? Yeah. So it gives someone to actually train themselves, not only in setting up to their line, but actually visualizing their line. And then the next step was the start line. So I project the start line, and what I found is that the brain's pretty amazing in our visualization, and I've just learned over the years that some people visualize different ways, and some folks never even visualize. Yes.
Oh no, you're right. You're right. There's some people who don't have a visualization in their mind. I know that, like you mentioned Jack earlier. Jack would literally see the ball roll to the hole, go in the hole, roll out of the hole, come back to his putter on the line that he wanted it to go. Most people could never do that. So that when you have something that is right in front of you that's showing you where your line is now, it's easier for you to then see that in your mind, as opposed to maybe if you don't have that, that creativity or that imagination.
Wait, let me tell you, this is the one thing that kind of struck me, that got me into the line more so than anything. When I instruct, one of the things I do a lot of probing. If someone misaims their putter, the one thing I learned is the first question. Well, the first thing I do is I look at their body and I see, is their body in line? And I look at their eye line. Is their eye line in line? Because those are things that will impact our perception.
Mm-hmm.
It's not surprising that Jack aimed 2 inches left of the cup from 10 feet. Look at how his body was set up. He'd open up a little bit,
yep.
And that affected his perception, and then his stroke. And the one thing I've learned about bad aim is, and I've like I said, most people misaim their putter. So one of the things I've learned about bad aim is that not all bad aim is necessarily a bad thing. You can say Jack aimed 2 degrees left of his target, but it wasn't a bad thing because he did it consistently, and his stroke complemented what he did. Most amateurs don't have that characteristic.
Right.
They don't have that. Their stroke is not grooved. Connection, but the compensations are quick. Their timing becomes a real issue, and when they make the compensation. So the one thing I've noticed over the years as I'm instructing is if I see a compensation and it's noticeable, it's usually it's going to be problematic. So, but I've seen folks that misaim, but you can't really see their compensation in their stroke. It's very fluid. Those are the folks that you maybe really don't mess with them. I've had a guy aim 9 inches right of the hole, and you could not see his motion was so fluid. And he'd roll it, he from 10 feet, so 9 inches is probably 4 degrees. He would roll it back on his line so smoothly you couldn't see it. You don't want to mess with a guy like that. There's good aim and there's bad aim, and so the one thing, I kind of lost my train of thought on where I was when we lost that connection. Remind me of what we were talking about.
So you were saying that there's certain players that can aim offline, but essentially their stroke, it works for their stroke. Whereas there's other players, if they're not as good, they can aim offline. But the deal with the players who aren't as good is they can't consistently create the same stroke to compensate for that aim that is off.
That's right.
And now they're missing more putts than let's say somebody like Jack, who didn't miss too many of them because he was so used to, and he was a much better player, so he was consistent. And I found too that with the lower handicap players, they can do things more consistently. Even if it's not where you want them to be, they can still produce what they have to produce,
Exactly.
because they compensate, and they know how to compensate consistently. Whereas a lower a player who doesn't have that type of talent cannot be as consistent. So now those flaws are much more exaggerated throughout across the board.
And that's, you can take that example and run it across every skill sport ever created.
Yes.
And you're going to always have guys that are unorthodox that are very talented and can pull it off, but you wouldn't teach that way.
Exactly. I mean, and I say that a lot to students where they'll say, well, this guy does this or that guy did that. And I'd say, well, we're just mere mortals. These guys were not.
Yep.
These guys are far ahead and above, and they could get away with that because of their talent. You don't have that kind of talent. Probably never will. Neither will I, for that matter, even though I'm teaching you. So what we have to do is we have to embrace what's going to be the best for yours to get you the most consistent. And one of those things is squaring your putter face up at address. I mean, it's a good thing to do.
Well, but I tell you what, it's usually a sign, and I'm going to get back on track on where we originally were now. It's usually a sign of someone's perception, and sometimes folks, they have bad spatial awareness. They have bad perception of where their target is.
Yes.
And so the brain will compensate for that, and so they may think the target is 6 or 8 inches left of where it actually is, and they don't have a chance. You think they don't have a chance to roll it to the hole, and somehow their brain compensates. But it can be, if they don't have the talent level that we were just talking about, it can be very problematic.
Yeah.
So I was saying that when people misaim their putter, and I see that they're squaring up well, and it seems like their perception is well, then I start probing. Like, I ask questions, what are you aiming at? And I tell you what, can be a very interesting question sometimes.
Yeah.
Because different people aim at different things.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the answer can sometimes be derived in, well, if you're aiming at that, why don't you try this? For instance, if you're aiming all the way down at the hole, if you're telling me you're trying to aim 2 inches left of the hole, maybe we should redo things. Maybe you should start aiming, find a spot much closer and aim at that and expand your line. Probing, all of this probing I was doing, and like I said, I always probe all my students, and I usually teach some really good players. So I came across something that would seem to be a common thread among great putters.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, the great putters always told me that they saw a line, they saw a path to the hole, they saw the curve, they saw the hole, the path, and the funny thing was, some guys would say, well, I see it's orange and it's a 1 inch wide. Next guy would say, I see railroad tracks. The next guy would say it's pink. The next guy would say it's black. And it was amazing how what they saw varied, but it was still, the common theme was they saw the path. I compared my notes with Mike Shannon, and he said, man, same thing, same story. Great putters, the one thing that they can do is see the path. That's the one, if you were to ask me, it's not technique. We've seen different great putters. They all may have different techniques, because they grew up learning it that way.
Yeah, that's true. I know that for me, I see like the width of a Hot Wheels track. Like, remember Hot Wheels when we were kids? Yep. I see the width of a Hot Wheels track in a light green color. Just go right to the hole, and I just put it down the track. That's all I do.
So I teach a guy here in Houston that he's in his early 60s. He played golf at Penn State. He's won the City Am here a couple of times in his career, and he's won the Senior City Am a couple of times. He about gave up the game when he finally contacted me. We'd been friends, but he'd never taken a lesson from me. And he credits me. He was ready to get to the game, and he credits me with saving his putting. But he ended up winning a senior AM a couple of years ago, and he had shot a 67 on the final day with 9 birdies. I'm like, I was like, next time I had a chance to talk to him, I said, Gary, what was that like? Now, Gary always told me his path was 1 inch wide. It was orange. I said, what was that day like? And he said, Rick, I'd walk onto the putting green, and the lines were just popping at me. In other words, he didn't have to work to see them. He said, no, now, these days are rare. He said, it's not always like that. But on this particular day, the putt path was popping at me. I mean, and that's, some people call it the zone or whatever, but that's what he saw. So, you can't really talk about technique with all the great putters because there's so many variety of techniques. But one common thread seems to be their imagination, their ability to visualize it. Now, how they visualize it can be different. Not just the colors and the shapes and like you said, you see Hot Wheels tracks and the next guy might see railroad tracks, but how they construct it. Some guys, I found this because I pro. Some guys will determine their start line, and then their imagination will complete the path to the hole. And a lot of them will see it in real time. They'll see like the ball rolling. And then I've had some other great golfers that tell me they reverse engineer. They start from the hole. They imagine where the ball rolls into the hole. They build the curve, and then it comes back to their start line. And that's how, a lot of those guys never really even see a start line. They see just the curve, and then they putt to the curve. I mean, think about it. It's just, they never see a start line. They may not set up consistently from one putt to the next. There's plenty of guys that, and over the years, that they'll set up one way to a left to a right, and then they'll set up another way to a right to a left breaker. But what they do is those kind of guys, they'll see the curve, and all they're doing is putting to that curve. So
right.
all this visualization stuff, it just kind of opened up my eyes to one of the real secrets of putting great. Does everybody have the ability to visualize? Yeah, maybe to different levels, but I think everybody does. I don't think everybody visualizes, and so my idea was develop this laser line, and if we can somehow start to train the brain at least to tickle it, so it starts.
Wake it up.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I do that all the time with drills in golf where, it might be a perfect example, but you got a player who has a problem with their lower body, and it's really not connected to their upper body. So then you start to give them drills to wake up that pathway in the brain to start to talk to that part of the body. Next thing you know, it starts to do it naturally. So this is the same type thing.
I always compare this this process of visualization, it can be sometimes a grind on the brain, and that's why some folks just shortcut it, because it takes effort. It's like, I always tell my students, I compare it. It's like watching a movie versus reading a book.
Yeah.
You can read a good book, and if the author's really good and they're describing food, they can describe it to where you can taste it. But watching a movie, your brain is just basically zero. Your imagination is just turned off because it's providing you all the feedback just through video, right?
Sure. Well, it's the director's idea of what he wanted you to see. It's not what you see. And so when someone reads a book, they could all read the same book, but see the scene in their mind totally differently.
See, so this is what we're talking about here, with all of this visualization stuff. And so I just knew that, it's like playing a piano. Everybody can be taught to play the piano if they're committed and dedicated. They can be taught to play the piano. Now, some they may not get past simple little tune, and some can compose great music.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about here with the mind, and what I was trying to do and what I was trying to trip with this idea of this laser line. Now, this is a pretty interesting little story. Whenever I first developed the laser, I went out and I tested it, and I got one of my good friends in the neighborhood. He's been in the golf business for years, but he's probably one of the best amateur putters that I know. He's really, really good. He can go out. He can play golf for. He can not play golf for 6 months and go out and shoot in low 70s. He's just one of those guys. He doesn't have to practice. He's just gifted and has that skill. So we went out and I set up the laser. We used my perfect putter. Got the perfect path to the hole. We selected a 10-foot putt. It was it probably, if you're measuring down at the hole, it probably broke 6 inches left to right. So what I did is I extended his start line all the way down to the hole. So the line ends up being 6 inches left of the cup. Got the visual on that?
Yep.
So we set up, and he proceeds to putt. Because I'm thinking, boy, this is going to be great. This is going to give you the perfect line. And he misses the first 5 putts on the high side. Misses them. This guy's great. And he misses them. So I'm going to ask you, why do you think he missed?
Because of his speed. He wasn't controlling his speed.
Because that straight line.
For that line.
For that straight line that he was looking at all the way down to the hole robbed him of seeing the curve and robbed him of feeling the speed.
Right.
So think about it. It was all visual. Seeing that visual line robbed him.
Sure, because probably before what he was doing was he was putting to the apex of that line where then it began to break off and curve to the hole, and then you set up the line and he was putting to the line that was by the cup.
He was just putting down the line.
Yeah.
So I like, well, let's try. So then what I did was I readjusted the line and I set it up so that the start line did not extend beyond the point of separation.
Okay.
I'm calling the point of separation when the ball noticeably starts to leave that straight line and continue its path into the cup.
Okay.
So now what his brain does is there's the start line, and all his brain does is then extend that line and visualize the remainder of the path. So this is where I think I can really trip the mind into, let's tickle it so it starts to actually use it. So now he starts to make everything, right? Now he's making putt after putt. Now the true John Brisbane is coming through. He's putting like I know he puts them. So that really got me to thinking. Now that's pretty amazing that if I can come up with a way that I can tickle the brain and tickle the imagination of a person that may not visualize and help them to visualize the curve, because the magic to putting is to seeing that path and seeing that curve. I think I've established that just among all the great putters, seeing the path is really important.
I totally agree.
So that's where this whole line training came in. So I've got different models. I've got models of this laser, a simple one that shoots a point that assesses aim.
Can we see those?
Yeah.
Because in the beginning of the podcast we were talking before we went on the air, and you set them up. So let's take a look, and at least for our listeners there who are listening to us on just iTunes or something like that, that's just a podcast format, remember that you can go to Bernard Sheridan on YouTube, and this video, you'll be able to watch this video. So let's go with that.
Okay, so here's the original laser that shoots a point, and basically it's just, my battery's run down on this one, but this one just shoots a point.
Okay.
And then I came up with this version that, can you see that line?
Yeah, it actually shoots a green line there.
So it shoots a green line on the putting surface, and this is the same model sitting on a tripod. So on this one, that we have plenty of people that what they'll do, the instructor will set this behind the target. So they might set it behind the hole and shoot it back at the ball. So it gives you, and like on a straight putt, it gives you a really neat, it's like a laser chalk line, basically.
Sure.
So when you're putting, you can do your start line putting, because I think it's really important that you learn the face angle awareness. And this helps you with your face angle awareness at impact, rolling it down your putt. That's the other thing about great putters is they roll the ball down their perceived line. And then what I did was I came up with, of course, the tripods. So here's the laser, same laser as the one we just saw, mounted on top of a tripod. So with this tripod, what I'm able to do is set it up behind the golfer, project the line over the golf ball and out in front of it. So this would be their start line.
Right.
Okay. And then of course that can be turned on manually, and it can be turned on and off with a remote. And then I came up with the user. As you can see, this one is mounted to the triangular base. It's got 3 feet. This front one, it can come off, so you can do the tilting up and down, or you can. It's a leveler. I can raise it up.
You can adjust it, sure.
And down. And that will control the length of the line. So if I lower it, you'll see that I just shorten my line.
Sure.
I'm going to shorten it even more. See how short it's gotten?
Yep.
So I can control the length of my line. So then what I did is then I came up with a simple model. It's not mounted on the tripod. There's no, or it's not mounted on the triangular base, which is this is valuable to instructor, but really for a golfer, all they need is the laser to be able to be set up and shoot a line.
Right.
And so we came up with that simpler version that any user can use. And of course, like I said, you've got the remote, so I can stand up over a putt, and with my remote, if I may turn it off, set up to my putt, turn it on. Am I where I think I am? Turn it off. I can putt with it off. I can putt with it on. This is where you can really start to see where the visualization can come in by being able to turn it off and turn it on, and then seeing your line. I mean, how many times can we? Like I said, a chalk line, you can practice to a chalk line, but we don't have a chalk line out there when we play golf. We just have our visualization. So this can help us train that. So those are my three versions of laser optics.
And they're pretty cool, and they work outdoors too, in sunlight, correct?
They do. They work now in the very, very bright sunlight. What you will notice is that the sun will filter it out. So you might take a line that in the later part of the day, you might be able to shoot a line that's 10 feet long. In the bright sunlight, you might only be able to shoot that line 2 or 3 feet.
Okay.
But 2 or 3 feet, as we've just learned, is adequate. The key is being able to project a start line that I can putt down. So then my brain, my imagination can take over and visualize the rest of that path to the hole.
Sure. So there's another product that you created too, and it's called a T-bar. Is that correct?
Yep.
So, and how does that help the player? And do you have a sample of that with you?
Okay, I'm going to show that. And I don't know if you can see that, but
Yep.
The T-bar, you see these crossbars here, that goes across the tops of your shoulders where you really want it to hit.
Okay.
What that does is it connects the shoulders to the putter. I'm a big believer that, on today's fast greens, that the stroke starts with the shoulders, because the arms, everything is, our putter's connected to our hands, and our hands are connected to our forearms, and it runs right up to our shoulders. So it's all connected. And I'm really big on teaching people how to putt connected, trying to keep it a fluid motion. And when I first started teaching back in the early 2000s, I always had folks that would come in and they were real wristy. They had some kind of motion that was going on with their hands that were different from their shoulders. And of course, I'm trying to create a fluid motion. So, yeah. I would always first we came up with a product that resisted the wrists, but then that would create motion in other levers. You got your elbows, you got your wrists, you got your fingers, and then you've got the shoulders, and so I had to come. I wanted to come. The reason I wanted to come up with something is I would try to resist this or that, and sure enough, the motion wouldn't go away, and because it's done non-consciously, right?
Right. Right. The body is compensating for the loss of motion in one part of the body to create motion in another part.
Exactly right. And that is one of the magic things about putting fluid is that you have to understand that the brain does coordinate all of these levers, and if the shoulders aren't finishing the stroke, the hands will.
Sure, absolutely, they'll compensate.
And so, I had to create something that would provide the feedback of what it felt like to putt fluid, what it felt like for everything to move together. It's a training aid that it's not a crutch. It's there for self-awareness. You putt with it a little bit, and then you take it off, and you've got the feel, and then you actually learn with it off more than you learn with it on.
Sure. It kind of wakes up again as we go back to what we talked about earlier in the podcast. It wakes up a portion of the brain that connects that part of the body to move, to create the control. All of a sudden, then that part of the body, when you take the thing off your shoulders, all of a sudden when you don't do it correctly, your body recognizes it immediately. And
Exactly.
Now you start to know the difference between when you're doing it correctly and when you're not. When you know that, you can start to compensate so you can do it more correctly more often. Next thing you know, now all of a sudden it's ingrained, and that's how you do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this gave me a tool that I could teach, I could explain it, I could show, I can demonstrate, I can explain, but what I couldn't do is transfer the feedback of feel. And that's what it did for me. It did all the talking for me when it got to the point of, all right, let's feel what the stroke is supposed to feel like. And so the first thing people do is they draw it back and they'll stop. In other words, they'll try to draw the putter back, and they'll stop about midway and go. It's not uncommon just to go, whoa, what just happened? Because most amateurs, their hands go much quicker than their shoulders.
Yeah.
And this will kind of resist that. And so it's usually a strange feeling for them, for the shoulders and the hands to move in rhythm together.
Sure.
But that's what a good stroke is. We don't hit the golf ball when we're putting. We stroke the golf ball.
Yep.
Most people hit it. Most people, and I'm probably telling you stuff you already know, but the other thing that's kind of magic about this is it teaches you how far you to take your putter back, because that's kind of key. If you don't take your putter back far enough to roll it the desired distance, your brain is going to compensate by moving your hands quickly. And of course, that's where you lose a little control and face angle and things like that. Quick motions typically cause not only distance control but direction control. And so that's why putting fluid is so reliable, is because it reduces the amount of errors that you might make, not only in distance control but also in direction control.
Sure. I mean, I deal with that all the time with my players, and they'll have a real short backswing for a putt that's fairly long, and so then they'll get a lot more handsy through the thing to get it to go that distance, as opposed to lengthening their backswing. Now it takes a lot of that out of it. I always attribute this to I use a metaphor of a bow and arrow, and when you want to shoot an arrow at a target that's 10 yards away, you're going to pull it back a certain amount.
Yep.
You're not going to pull it back all the way. You're going to pull it back a certain amount, and then you're going to let it go. And then if you want to shoot it like over the trees, you're going to pull it back a lot further. So if they can kind of use that to control their distance, then what will happen is the body does not become manipulative to try to control distance. It allows that to happen a little bit more naturally. They can also make it happen more consistently. to control their distance. I teach that all the time. Well, one of my specialties where I work is putting. So I'm like the putting guy at my company, and these things, putting has always intrigued me. And everything that you've been saying is exactly what I do, other than using your products, which I think I'm going to start doing, because I think it'll even change not only the way that I teach putting, but it'll also help them feel it a lot better, and also be able to visualize it a lot better, which I think is pretty awesome.
Yep. So it's kind of funny how, and so you come across this too, understanding your background, but you'll have some folks that say, well, I've got this buddy of mine. He's a great putter. He's got this little pop stroke.
Yeah, I hear that all the time.
And I'm like, well, he grew up with that pop stroke, and if it works for him, I would never change that.
Right.
But that's not the way that most people are going to putt.
Right.
Most people are not going to be effective like that.
Arnold Palmer had like a pop stroke. Brant Snedeker has a pop stroke. So, I mean, and that's fine for them. But the average player, it's really hard for them to control that distance. Once you take their hands out of it a little bit, or maybe not take their hands out of it, but like what you're saying, sync them up so they're moving at the same rate, which to me is almost like taking them out. Then all of a sudden, they have a lot more consistency, and as you mentioned earlier, more fluidity, which is tempo, and all the greatest players that always have the same tempo.
Yep. Well, the tempo might vary from one to another player.
Sure.
But the tempo is consistent.
Exactly.
And that's one of the things I always preach in my I don't care what your tempo is necessarily. Your tempo is your tempo. I walk fast. I do things fast.
That's right.
My tempo's fast. The next guy might be slow. That what the brain can't figure out very well though is if you're constantly changing from one tempo to another tempo to another tempo, you can't swing a golf club, you can't swing a baseball bat, and you can't putt if you're constantly changing the timing of what you're doing.
Exactly.
So tempo is consistent. Tempo is key, but I'll tell you, it's this fluid motion stuff is so important in putting, and my device, the T-bar, is just it's something that is a good guide to get the person there. Now, is it for everybody? No. I mean, I'll never forget. One of the time when I created it years ago, I had the head pro at River Oaks, which is a really nice golf course here in town. He invited me over to show him and Mark O'Meara. He was teaching Mark O'Meara at the time.
Sure.
So now the guy that I'm the head pro, he aims about a foot left and shoves everything right. Well, he doesn't shove it. It's a quick motion he's got that pushes everything right. When he was younger, he could control it. As he was getting older, he was putting terrible. So here I am showing him, and I'm showing Mark O'Meara this device, my T-bar. So I put the device on the head pro, and he's like, I feel like I'm in a straitjacket.
Sure.
He could hardly pull the putter back. And we're sitting there, and I'm working with him, and I put the other one on O'Meara, and he's behind me. He's putting. So here's probably two extremes, right? But the head pro, as we're putting and as he's starting to feel it, he starts to feel the fluid motion. And he makes a comment. He said, this feels terrible, but he said, I'm doing something I haven't done in years. I'm hitting the sweet spot with every stroke. And it's rolling true. He's pretty much amazed. But he said, I feel like I'm in a straitjacket. O'Meara finally interrupts me. He's back here putting. He's been putting for 5 minutes. He finally interrupts me and he goes, Rick, what the hell is this thing supposed to do? He's not feeling anything, right? He's just as smooth. And that's the idea is that,
didn't change anything that he did. He was doing it anyway.
No, he was just fluid. And that's kind of what it builds. It builds fluidity. It builds everything moving together. So I've always said about the T-bar, the people that hate it the most are the ones that need it the most. Now, the quick little ending story of my friend there, that the head pro at River Oaks, that hated the T-bar, but liked what it did. Went on to putt terrible for 6 months, and finally said, "You know what? I'm going to try this thing." He said, "I'm old school." He just never tried it, so he decided, "I'm going to give this a go." So he devoted 6 weeks to putting with it every. He said, "I'd put it with it every night. Put it on, stroke. I take it off and stroke." And 6 weeks later, he's winning tournaments. He said, I'm putting, but I'm putting like I was when I was young. So, I mean, it was a success story. But the deal is it's just one of those tools that it's good for an instructor. It helps guide. If you want to correct your putting and come up with a fluid stroke, it's a good guide to get you there. Is it a crutch? Absolutely not. All the best learning is done with it off. And as a matter of fact, when I'm taking someone through a session, we'll putt with it, and how many putts they attempt, it's up to them. Some people might have to go 30 or 40 before they really feel the fluidity. Some people have it in 10 or 15. But what I always do is once they get the motion, and then I'll take it off, and once they have the motion, they feel like, I got it. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
I got it, because it's they've been doing it. They're over and over again. They got it. Then we go on to distance control drills, and we go on to working stroke balance and working tempo and working these things. And what I always find is that when we advance to that drill of working on distance control, I'll still see that motion that it looks like the T-bar is still on them, right? So they've taken the motion they just learned, and now they're focused on something else. They're focused on their stroke length. They're focused on, their tempo, and that's where the learning really takes place. The non-conscious mind is now carrying on what the T-bar had showed them. That's where we learn.
Right. It's pretty cool stuff. So where can we go? Send our listeners to be able to purchase this product, and maybe even be able to work with you.
My website is Wright Putting Dynamics. My last name, WRIGHT, puttingdynamics.com. You can go on the website, and there's a section for the T-bar. There's some video, there's some explanation, there's a section for the laser optics. There's some really good demonstration video, and some explanation of what it does. And then there's a web store that you can buy them. You can purchase all the products on. And if you hit the contact us, there's a little bit of my background, and if you're in the Houston area, if you want to book a session. I don't do it for a living. I run my business for a living, but I do instruction by request. Like I said, I was in Austin this past weekend working with a client. So all the stuff's right there at the website. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to set up a code. The code is going to be your last name, Sheridan.
Okay.
And I'm going to set that up, and I'm going to set it up so the first 10 people to buy the laser optics, the training version, get a 25% discount.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you very much.
I know you weren't expecting that, but I want to give some folks a taste of what this little training aid can do. So when we're done here, I'm gonna go set that code up, and of course you're gonna run this at a later date anyway, so I'll have plenty. But we'll set that code up, and like I said, it'll be set so the first 10 will get that discount.
Awesome. All
right.
Great. Well, look, it was great having you with us. And what we always like to say is, in parting, do your best to keep it in the short grass. You're doing that all the time anyway, if you're putting.
Right.
And once again, thanks so much for taking the time out. It was a wonderful interview, and a lot of great information was passed along to our guests.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care.
You've been listening to Breaking Par with Bernard Sheridan, the best golf interviews. Follow us on Twitter @Parbreakers and on Instagram @BSheridanGolf. Until next time, try to keep in the short grass.